Move over, baby. Give me the keys. I'm gonna try to tame your little red love machine. I say, little red Corvette. Baby, you're much too fast. Oh, little red Corvette. I'm gonna ride that body right to the ground. Right to the ground. Little red Corvette. Oh! Hey, how's it going, man? Everything's fucked up as usual. I'm butt naked from the waist down, but that's alright. It's getting kind of cold, kind of rainy outside, which sucks, but what can you do? Today I wanted to share a story of my formal initiation to witchcraft. Now, I've always had supernatural, paranormal, just weird in general experiences ever since I was a kid. Ever since, I could remember. Weird shit would always happen around me, and I could never find an explanation for it, and nobody else could either. They're like, the hell is this? Whatever. And in high school, around 13, 14 or so, I would read occult books, read occult books in the back of the class while the teacher was teaching. And I really didn't give a shit about mathematics or history or any of that bullshit. I'm like, fuck all this. I'm gonna become a wizard. Like, not interested in this mathematical bullshit. I want to just be a shaman and freaking dance around with a cigar, like in the Amazon rainforest or something. I don't want to deal with any of this stuff, right? So as I got older, like, it kind of waned, the interest kind of waned, because I tried out all a bunch of stuff, written in the books and stuff like that, and it kind of worked, but it wasn't enough of a confirmation for me to believe it. Like, the things that I've experienced from a very young age kind of solidified this sort of um, interest for me and actually made me a believer, because if it wasn't for that, I kind of would think it's just a bunch of BS, because if you have people tell you stuff in books, or just people tell you stuff in general, you're like, whatever, maybe it's just a story, whatever. But when you go through stuff like that yourself, you're like, what the hell is this, So it gives you validation that there is some reality in there somewhere. But I'm always searching for the core of the thing, like the core of the reality. So I'm very skeptical, and it's hard for me to accept anything. Like, even if I go through it, I still have some sort of form of disbelief, which is retarded. But you always have to have an open mind towards these things, because there's really not that much scientific research. Like, it's still very occult, hidden, unknown, whatever. So yeah, as I grew older, my interest kind of waned, but then around 19, I dated sort of like my first witchy female. Now, she was more of I'd say, the better side of like witchy stuff, like the light side of the occult, like healing and love and like various bathing rituals and protection and shielding and like basically stuff like that, the basics, That was cool, I learned a couple of things here and there. Um, you know, Definitely got some validation out of that relationship, so to speak. But then later, you know, I got another relationship around like 21 or so with like a dark-sided sort of witchy female, like more of the dark side of the occult, which involves sort of like, you know, sort of negative stuff, and like I don't really want to get into that too much, but let's just say the darker side of the occult. And that gave me sort of a stronger sense of like, oh, maybe there really is something to this, you know what I mean? But it wasn't until a little bit after that, after the relationship kind of broke up, I was just kind of like in this misery, sort of angst. And I was like still 21, almost 22 at the time, and I would hang around various cemeteries, but there was this one cemetery that I would always frequent, just to get sort of, a little bit of peace, a little bit of solace, away from people, away from everything, some place where I could just sit down and collect all my thoughts and just think about the complexities of life and reality and the universe and all this stuff, just to kind of relax, just kind of to calm my restless nature, so to speak, right? So I was just sitting there, and the sun was almost about to set, right? And I see like three pretty much figures in the distance, and I could see by their curves and their contours that they were indeed female, and they were dressed in all black. I'm like, ooh, this is pretty cool. Like, they're probably either Satanists or some kind of witchy females. just here to do some weird stuff, you know. I'm not necessarily gonna bother them or whatever, because, you know, let them do whatever the hell they want, you know. I'm not gonna be like your typical person, just run to like the freaking, hey, you know, there's people here, they're gonna like spray graffiti on the graves or whatever. I don't really care, you know. So I just sit there, just kind of minding my own business, and then I notice that they start coming closer and closer to me, right? And they're giving me like this weird ass stare. Like there were three of them. Witches usually come in threes or fours, but in my cases, in my experiences, there was always three, like three chicks, you know. So they start coming close, they're staring me down, like trying to figure me out, I guess, or whatever. And then they pretty much come up to me, like they're like right in front of me, like one here, one there, like surrounding me, so to speak. Started getting a little nervous. I'm like, oh man, like, am I gonna be like some kind of satanic, like God knows what, you know, are they gonna strip me butt naked and like do some kind of weird stuff to me? Like, there was a bit of excitement, and there was also a bit of fear in the whole situation, you know. Um, but my fear was kind of quenched when they just started asking me basic questions. They're like, oh, like, what are you doing here and all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm just chilling out, you know, I like hanging out here, whatever. And they're like, oh, we've seen you here before, and I'm like, really? Because I've never seen you here. So I'm like trying to think, like, maybe they were watching me from the distance or something. And sorry about all that stuff. What can you do? But yeah, I'm like, oh, they must be staring at me from a distance like all the previous times I was there, which is kind of creepy, but kind of admirable, because, you know, you have three chicks kind of staring at you, you know, have some sort of interest in you. I don't mind, you know. So yeah, they start asking me basic shit, like my birthday, and like, what am I doing here, and like, oh, this and that. And it just like slowly elevated into like this full, like, sort of hypnotic occult experience where they pretty much told me all this stuff. They're like, oh, we know that you have potential, and we know you've been through a lot of interesting scenarios in your life and all this stuff. And I hear I'm thinking like, oh, these people are full of shit, you know. But whatever, you know. I'm like, I'll let it slide, you know. And then, because they were right, which is kind of weird. I didn't know how they knew that, so I was thinking they were just doing some kind of cold reading bullshit. So yeah, they just pretty much told me like, oh, you have potential, you've been experiencing all these things, blah 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 blah. And at the time, I was still in sort of misery, sort of grief from the previous relationship, and they're like, oh, you're in a lot of heartache, like we can feel that, this and that. And I'm like, yeah, I am, you know, but who isn't, you know? So pretty much what ended up happening is that they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, so to speak. Like, I mean, I could have refused if I wanted to, but it was just so good that, like I said, you know, I've been into this for so long, I'm like, might as well give it a shot and go all the way with it, because, you know, maybe I'll finally get the confirmation I seek, right? And pretty much what ended up happening is that the sun went down, and they started doing all this witchy stuff. They had like a whole bunch of like occult tools, and they had an athame, like they had a chalice and all this stuff. And I don't really want to get too much into details of what actually went on, but because, you know, one of the rules is to keep silent, you know, I have to omit a lot of details, you know. So basically what ended up happening was some like interesting, like, occult ritualistic stuff, and nudity and blood type of stuff, and just a whole bunch of interesting stuff in general. And I'm still like bewildered by the whole thing, because it just happened kind of so randomly, but it was a very beautiful thing, you know. Sky clad in the darkness of a peaceful place, you know, with, you know, obviously three naked females in front of you. You know, as a male, it's kind of hard to keep your cool, you know, because, you know, the little soldier downstairs wants to rise up for a little salute, if you catch my drift. But, you know, I'm sort of a natural type of person, so I'm like, fuck, if I'm gonna pop a boner, I'm gonna pop a boner, you know, like, they're nude in front of me, like, they get this shit, like, you know, it's supposed to be intimate, it's supposed to be sacred, it's supposed to be the expression of nature, and the beauty of nature, beauty of life, and all this, you know, sort of stuff, so whatever, you know. And, yeah, things happened, it was pretty crazy. Like I said, there was blood involved, there was, like, hot, like, sexual interesting things going on, and yeah, they pretty much helped me because I kind of knew the basic principles of an initiation, but they helped me do it formally. You know, they helped me do it the way occultists would have back in the day, like in ancient times. There was like no barriers, no rules. It wasn't like something where you go to a Wiccan temple or whatever, and then like there's people in clothes and they're calling down the goddess and the god or whatever. It was none of that. It was very straight and to the point, very intimate, very sacred to me, because it was very practical. It was no bullshit. It wasn't like calling down any of these sacred names. There was some chants going on for sure, but it wasn't like, it didn't seem fake to me like a regular mass would be, you know, like a regular sort of thing like that would be, because all the bullshit was kind of omitted. We got down to the source. We did the whole initiation, you know. It was a very physical thing. It involved a lot of physicality, but it was also symbolic, and it was also on a spiritual level as well, you know. After that, they kind of like gave me sort of a magical practicing name that I should use, and I definitely do use it, but I can't disclose that because the oath that I made, you're not supposed to share your magical name. You know, you could make different various magical names and you could share those, but you can't share the one that you were initiated by, because that's the one that like sort of your soul or your spirit or whatever is known by, is known as, you know. Your physical body sort of has a name, but then you have your like spiritual side to it or whatever. And that information is not to be revealed unless, you know, you're with people you trust, or you're doing things and other people reveal their magical names, and you know, you'll feel it. You'll feel that, you know, that is their real thing and they're not bullshitting. Because yeah, I can make up a name like, you know, like Merlin Raven's Claw the Third. But obviously that's a bunch of bullshit, you know. Some people do have those sort of initiatory names, and I respect that, but you will know when it's the real thing or not, you know, just by the way the person says it, just by the way you feel and the way they feel, you know, the mutual kind of connection that occurs while interacting with other people. So yeah, it was a very interesting evening, and it was sort of like a transformative process, because like the things would kind of ramp up, you know, all the weird occurrences and all the weird events would kind of ramp up. You know, I started to notice synchronicities and like how like sort of destiny functions. And it's not necessarily destiny, because when you hear a lot of other people talk about destiny, they're like, oh yeah, you have this path laid out in front of you, blah blah blah. I don't necessarily believe that. I feel we forge our own path. You know, if I wasn't there at that particular time in that particular place, you know, where would destiny be? It would be a completely different sort of path. You know what I mean? It's the same thing like with anything. I feel that we forge our own paths and our own destinies. Meaning, like right now, you know, I could go and walk to the liquor store and it would be a completely different shift of events. You know, it's like, oh, I'll walk there, oh, maybe I'll find $1 on the sidewalk, maybe I'll talk to some random person on the way there, and it could be potentially life-changing experience. You know, I could be walking down the street and some record producer comes out of nowhere and he's like, oh, you look like a musician, blah, blah, blah. Do you have any music? And then I could show him some music, and then who knows, you could get signed. You see how I'm trying to portray how destiny can kind of change and alter in weird ways? Like every new person you meet, every encounter, everything, it's all a very supernatural. It's all an act of will, so to speak, but we don't see it. Even me walking from here to the bathroom to take a piss is a major act of magic, a major act of will, you know, because I could just, you know, take out my, you know, little soldier and just piss all over the place, you know. Like, you have choices. That's what I'm trying to say. And they could very they can have different impacts depending on, like I said, I don't necessarily believe in karma, so to speak, but I do believe in sort of the natural kind of like the way things flow. You know, if you agree to that whole thing with, you know, three naked witchy females, like obviously it's gonna have an impact on you. If you don't, you know, you could back out, you could go somewhere else and be a different thing, you know. So yeah, it was a very transformative experience, very strange dreams after that, very sort of changes in everything, in diet and overall feeling of my body and my entire being, and it was just very, very fascinating to me. And you know, that was a couple of years ago. Now things have kind of settled down a bit, but I'd say about a year ago, like when I was like 22 or so, I met up with this like vampire chick, right? It's very weird. New York is known for having like this weird like goth sort of vampiric subculture, and I was kind of walking through this part of the city where there were sort of a great majority of those kinds of people there, you know. And I find it interesting. I find it cool because it's a part of me that resonates, you know. And once again, this sort of strange, hypnotic, vampiric, witchy female came up to me. She wasn't witchy, she was just strictly vampiric. But vampires are known to be, you know, users of metaphysics, occult, and like they understand that by nature. Like it's like second nature to them. They get it, you know. And she was a sanguinarian, meaning she wasn't your typical psi vampire or anything like that. It was strictly blood kind of things, you know. I don't necessarily have a blood fetish, you know. I like, to a certain degree, like, you know, when it comes to blood fetishes, it's like it's something that you're sexually aroused by, or it moves you in some type of weird sexual way. But to me, it's I don't really have a sexual drive towards that. Like, I do have a smoke fetish, don't get me wrong, so I understand the difference between the two, you know. Like when I see like a good looking girl like smoking whatever, it kind of like, I don't want to say I get a boner or anything, but it like arouses me in a weird way, you know. It definitely sexually arouses me, definitely creates a form of sort of attraction. It's like, oh, you know, I might want to spread her legs and, you know, bang it out, you know. You know what I mean? Like, that's what, like, that's a smoke fetish. That's what it kind of does to you. There's obviously other people that just kind of get a straight up boner and start wanking off and stuff like that, but I'm not into that. I'm into that on a more intimate type of level, you know. But yeah. Um, yeah, the whole different thing with the blood fetish is not sexually arousing to me at all. Like, I don't get any tinge. I don't, like, if I see a chick with like blood splurting out of her like mouth or like dripping down her like neck or something, I don't get like super aroused and just want to bang her or whatever. It's more of a like this type of uh, feeling, this type of like a quenching of a void, a quenching of some kind of interesting pain in some sort of way, you know. Like when, if you smoke cigarettes or whatever and you look at that first cigarette of the day, there's that anticipation of like, oh yes, it's finally going to relieve me of all this stuff, it's going to instill me with all this vitality and energy and all that stuff. It's very similar to that. So yeah, through that, I'm not going to get into the details of that either, but it was a very interesting learning experience where I learned the potential of, you know, sanguinarian type of things, blood, and like the use of it and the power of it and stuff like that. It gave me kind of an interest on how to use it in my personal occult practices and just in general. Like, I have a very interesting attraction to that type of stuff because it's pure vitality, you know. Like in the Bible it says the blood is the life, and it legitimately is. It's full of vitality, it's full of force. It's like a drug that I can't even begin to describe, because it's like, think of like sort of amphetamines times 10, you know. Like, it's a very visceral type of, it's not like psi stuff either. It's not like psi vampirism where like it feels sort of similar. I feel that the blood type of stuff is a lot more potent and a lot more intimate, and it's like you could literally feel every you know, filament of your body like resonating and buzzing, and it's just like you feel on top of the world. It's a feeling I can't really explain, and obviously it might be the adrenaline present in the other person's blood or something. I don't necessarily know what it's all about, but I'm just saying that it's a very potent experience. It's far from placebo. Like psi vampirism, like I would sometimes would be like, if somebody tells me, oh, I had a psi vampirism experience, most likely I'll be like the first to like put it down as sort of a placebo or some kind of whatever, because I understand that feeling, but it could definitely be mistaken for something else. Maybe like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different things, but if you ingest like legitimately fluids, and then it gives you this sort of buzz and it gives you this sort of effect, that's way more potent than any, you know, sort of street narcotic, so to speak, then you kind of know that there's something to it. But yeah, that's about it. You know, I don't want to share too much. It's kind of rambling around now. But that's pretty much it. You know, I would get more into details, but I can't. I'm sorry. Like, you have to go through it yourself. You have to find legitimate practitioners, and you have to follow what feels right, you know. I can't disclose any details. I believe in secrecy, and I believe in stuff like that, because what went on in that whole scenario isn't something you should share with the general public, because it is far too intimate. It's like, it's just far too outworldly for anybody to believe it and to whatever, and you know, they'll have different assumptions of you and whatnot. So yeah, that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.